That was a record for joining. You guys are my best class consistently at doing that. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you. But we're gonna get into what we're doing today. I see someone is chatting. Nice. Thank you, Brady. Okay, so you should not be talking. Thank you. All right. So we're gonna start today looking at Photoshop in a very similar manner of how we've looked at Illustrator and different pieces of different kind of elements of design with a sort of pretest where I'm going to show you how to get started. I want to see how you do without instruction. Then I'm going to give you instruction and I want you to try a second time with your new knowledge. So that is assignment 8.1, which I will pull up on your agenda here. Oh, Mira, I need to check your PC. I totally forgot. Okay, so you guys could be looking at, that's not the right one. Let me do this. I tried what happened? There we go. Let's go here. I tried something different with the due date thing by color coding it. You guys are Wednesday because you're P6. So you guys are in orange, which means that this assignment is due at midnight tonight. But we will have class. All right. So, hey. See you not in the Zoom. Okay. So the duck horse challenge. You guys are gonna use Photoshop to attempt this activity without my instruction at the beginning. This is our pretest because it's a challenge that gives me data about what you know how to do in Photoshop, and no points will be lost for error or inability to complete. If you turn in the same two pictures, it's worth the same amount of points. If you did not turn in, or if you turn in a fully completed project. Okay, so again, because this is a pretest, you get points for attempting. Later in the Photoshop units, though, I will be more curious about your yes. We better go. All right. So I'm going to show you guys how to set up your document and save these files so that you can get started this is your end goal. This is your end result. This takes Mr. Hendricks and I about 10 minutes. Okay. That's not for me and him to flex on your skills. You guys, if you've never seen Photoshop before, you don't know what I'm about to show you after you attempt this. So the objective of this assignment is for me to see how you approach trying out creating this effect. So you've been provided with the two source files here, which we're going to put into their own folder in Graphic Design OneDrive to make things a lot easier to manage. So I go to my 6-period Graphic Design and create a new folder for assignment 8.1. That's 8.2. I got the wrong one on there. Okay, hey, not helpful. Thank you. All right, so what you're gonna do is right-click, save image as. Oh, that's for first period. Put it in your 6-period Graphic Design 8.1 folder. We've done lots of right-click, save image as, but this will get you the full res images that you'll need for this assignment. And it takes you right back to the last place something was saved. Oops, I lost the file name. Save image as, duck to. And then if I click, oh, I'm clicking all kinds of buttons today. You can see there we have our two images ready to go. And I'll show you how to set up the Photoshop file, but not how to actually do this quite yet. So I have a 20-minute window planned for you guys to use to either research how to combine these two images together, how to do some Photoshop basics. You can just go straight into attempting what I'm asking of you here, but the last thing I'll show you before the official lesson is when you click New File in Photoshop. This looks a lot like Illustrator, I imagine. Click New File in Photoshop. You want to use the default Photoshop size. Click Create. Then you're going to go File, Save As, and put that into the same folder with the pictures, 6-period Graphic Design 8.1. I'm just going to call this my first initial last name. We're going to call it 8.1 for now. You don't have to do the full scheme until you submit it. So you can just kind of keep things going here. So For the next 20 minutes, your goal is to try and create this creature, hybrid, beast right here. All right? Using all your internet resources, you can ask your nearby friends, but I want to see how good you guys do without my instruction, and then you'll have a second attempt after I show you how to do this. Okay? So, 20 minutes starts now. Let me get your timers set up. Hold on. I had a whole thing prepared. There we go. We're going to do this one first. We're gonna do this. Hold on. Hold on. You're looking behind the curtain. You're watching me click all my buttons here. There we go. Okay. Your time starts now. Okay. Use it wisely. We're live once more. This phone should be zipped up, please. At least one headphone out. Brandon's gonna put up. You can put it in the water bottle pocket too if your bag has one. It doesn't have to be like sealed. Okay, we'll check it this side. Let me show you how to do this. Phones away, please. Hopefully, I'll zip them up out of sight. Back to your seat so I can show you how this is done. All right. So, hey. Locking. Okay. So here's our Photoshop workspace, right? Looks very, very similar to how Illustrator looks. Yeah. Just with a couple different. Do you want to do it? I can give you the computer. Okay. So we have our Photoshop workspace here, our default Photoshop size, which is a 5:7 photograph in inches, 300 DPI. But none of that particularly matters for what I'm about to show you here. What do you notice down here about the layers panel? What kind of words and what kind of symbols are connected to this little... Opacity. Yes, that is there. What else do you notice? Background. Background. Okay, what about background do you notice? Locked. It's locked. That is a default part of Photoshop because Photoshop is known as what's called a destructive editor. When you are making edits in a Photoshop file, you are permanently changing pixels, unless you do them in the way I'm about to show you, that you cannot go back and undo, okay? Non-destructive editors are programs like Illustrator or Adobe Lightroom, where they basically make either a filter in Lightroom's scenario that goes over top of a photograph, or, as Adobe Illustrator you're familiar with, the vectors, plotting the coordinates, graphing between them, very easy to come back and change. Photoshop doesn't behave like that. You are changing the actual raw data, transmogrifying it, alchemizing it, all types of fun words, to something completely different, okay? So what I'm gonna do, the way I would approach this challenge, is I would go to File, Open, and I'm gonna open up the horse JPEG by itself, okay? I'm gonna ask you the same question. What do you notice about this layers panel right down here? It says background, okay? You can just shout them out. My layers isn't there. Okay, same process. If you can't see a thing, you go to Window and then you check the box, make sure that layers is available. You can also go Workspace, make sure you're in Essentials, and then if something's missing, you can always reset your Essentials and it will go back to the default here. Okay, so we see the horses on the background. What happens when I try to move it? Interesting. It's selected as a background layer. I cannot move a background layer or change its stacking order, blending mode, or opacity. However, I could convert this to a normal layer if I wanted to, and then I could have access to these attributes. It's not what I want to do. It's not what I particularly care for. Okay, I'm going to File, Open once more and get the duck in here. But before I bring the duck over to Photoshop, or sorry, we're in Photoshop, to the horse, I'm going to do a little bit of editing on this picture by itself. This is the workflow that I was taught. It does not necessarily mean it is the only one that exists, but it is an efficient version that I've had a lot of success with. What you guys are doing here, what you've been tasked with, is a challenge called compositing, okay? If we think about that word compose, what other words do you know of that are associated with composing? You can just shout them out. Music. What is a composition of music made up of? True, but what? I was going for multiple different types of instruments together to create one thing, okay? What about compost? What's that made of? Dirt and? Worms and? Lots of different things. Interesting how that word is very similar to a composition in Photoshop where we're combining multiple different things. So in order to do this, since Photoshop is a destructive editor and I want to keep my data safe in case I ever did want to go back to it, I'm going to click on my background layer and hit Control J. So keep your eyes right here and watch what happens in theory. There we go. Wow, now there's 2 ducks. But one of them says layer 1 and it's unlocked and I can change all types of stuff about it. Can't tell, but I can change all types of stuff about it. This is one of the first things that I was taught to make Photoshop less destructive. If I ever need to go back to this original image, let's say I wanted to turn this, let's say I wanted to, I don't know, let me do something crazy here real quick. We're gonna go into filter and then liquify. And let's say I really mess this whole duck situation up, right? I permanently goof these pixels in a way that's not gonna, it's not gonna recover. And I click OK. Oh no, my duck is tarnished. It's not actually. I've got a background saved under here. This is just an edit on top of a background. So that's why I Control J. I'm gonna undo this liquify real quick so that I have access. Come on, there we go. So that I have a version saved of the original so I don't lose it. So now, since I'm making a composition combining 2 different things, I need to selectively choose what I'm going to keep from my smaller image and add it to my my other image. And the way that I was taught to do this, there are lots of different ways. It mostly is these 3 tools right here. These 3 groups of tools, yours might look like this. It's the first or the 2, 3, and 4. Okay. These 3 groups of tools are used for making selections. So if you click and hold on the magic wand and you take the quick selection tool, I zoom in a little bit here. What do you notice about my cursor? It's an X. It means I can't interact with anything. Why do you think that is? I'm not on a layer. So if I go to layer 1, wow, it's a brush a lot like in Adobe Illustrator. So if I use my bracket keys, I can increase or decrease my cursor size. Watch what happens when I click in the space of the duck right here. Boom. What? I have now created a line of marching ants is the official term for what this is called around the outside edge right here. It looks a lot like a dotted line to cut on in kindergarten, doesn't it? Can you shift click different parts? I can shift click different parts. I'm gonna get to that here in a second. Okay. So bracket keys are right next to the backspace key. So what do you guys notice about my line of marching ants? Where does it stop? Or where does it, not where does it stop, but where does it draw the line? What did you say? The outline, okay. Where else? Look, let's focus on the outline. What do you notice about this specific spot right here? I'll help you. It's a quick selection. So, hey guys, let me finish real quick. So, the way that the quick selection tool works is it looks for contrasting pixels. Okay, you see how it selected a majority of the whites? That's because it's looking for the difference between the white and green around the outside edge and the difference between the white and the yellow between the beak and the feathers. Okay, so if I wanted to include the beak in my dotted line, in my dotted kindergartner line of ants, for example, all I have to do is just click on the beak. And Photoshop is going to make its best guess, emphasis on best guess, of where it wants me to put that contrasting line. Okay, so if I punch out a little bit here, you can see I've got a pretty decent kindergartner line of marching ants happening around the part of the duck that I want to include. If I really want a little bit more, I can just right click once a couple more times, but it's not that important because we're going to do a very important next step here in a second. All right, so how many of you guys got to this spot in your experiences? You got the dotted line on there. Raise your hands. Okay, 1, 2, 3, couple handfuls. Okay, I'm seeing some dotted line hands. Good, you're on the right track. What you do next is very important. Keeping in mind that Photoshop is a destructive editor. Hey, shush. Photoshop is a destructive editor. We don't want to lose these pixels on layer 1. We want to keep them just in case. I personally am a little bit paranoid with my data and I like to keep lots of backups and versions, but you know, that's not really a requirement. That's a Blakeney thing. But what I'm going to do is press this button right here. What do you think is going to happen when I click on the button that says layer masks when I hover over it? It's going to make a mask. Okay. That's exactly right. But what do you think that entails? Let's think about the word mask. What does Camille, what does a mask do? It does make the duck's head disappear on a layers in a way. Okay. So let's think about what is a word. Okay, sorry. Let me refocus that. Halloween masks. Where do they go? Cover your face. They cover your face. How do you look out of a Halloween mask? Eye holes, cutouts, right? It behaves very, very similarly in Photoshop. So when I click this button, boosh, I have created a mask, a Halloween mask. The black part of a mask is the amount of transparency. So black is fully transparent, fully see-through. You cannot see any of the data back here. And white is fully opaque. It's kind of opposite the way that shades typically happen in art. But you can see this white shape of a duck's head punching out of the black background, right? The terminology that I was taught that I'm not a huge fan of is white reveals and black conceals. I prefer to call it a white window on a black background, okay? So the white window is the part that's going to shine through. It's going to allow light to pass through it. It's going to be visible. And the black background is going to be hidden. It's going to be obscured. It's going to be out of the way, okay? So keep that in mind. The old way that I'm not a big fan of is white reveals, black conceals. Blakeney's way is white windows on black backgrounds. So what we're going to do now, we can move around this duck head to our heart's content. But when I move around the duck head, keep your eyes right here. Watch what happens to the layer thumbnail. You see how they move together? It's because these masks are currently linked. If I were to unlink these masks, I can move the background image around. See how it selects the pixel layer? Move the background image around, but the mask stays the same. So I'm going to put my mask back together so that's linked. Okay, enough yakking. I'm going to Control C this whole layer, go back to my horse, Control V. It's going to bring the entire set of data along with it. So this is the whole pixel layer. If I hold Shift and click on my mask thumbnail, you can see the pixels, the raw pixels. Shift click on it again, turns it back into a mask. So this means when you mask something out, it retains its original file size. You can see the whole ducks, all the ducks' secret data is hidden in here for Google to steal. So what we're going to do next is we're going to do a little bit of arranging to try and get my duck and my horse sort of similar. What'd you guys notice about resizing things while holding Shift in Photoshop? What'd it do? Does not work like Illustrator, right? Photoshop's the opposite. Because Photoshop is a photography-based, compositing-based program, typically more in the real world, real life world, I mean, with examples like this, you do not have to hold Shift to scale evenly. By default, it is not. It's actually the opposite to Illustrator. So if I hold Shift, it's going to squash my poor duck, who's really going through it, got decapitated and then squashed. It's really grim. Anyway, we're going to adjust this so that it's pretty similar. I mean, it's pretty close to what we're trying to do here. Maybe resize a little bit. I saw some of you using the opacity slider to kind of make the duck a little bit see-through, maybe to line up the body parts a little bit. When you're compositing, your goal is to make it as believable as possible, okay? So you're gonna resize here and there, maybe do a little bit of rotating. You can see we got a lot of duck energy happening here. Okay, let's just cover up the horse as much as we can. Maybe make it a little bit bigger. I'm being picky right now, so you don't have to go this. You don't have to go this depth. But you wanna make, because graphic designers are not lazy, we are efficient. You wanna save yourself as much time as possible. So I'm going to cover up as much as the horse's face as I can to yield me this result right here, okay? Photoshop is also kind of a picky program in the way that it won't let you do other things until you do something called committing a change. So if I click File, you see a lot of my options are grayed out here. It's because I've not finished rotating this duck technically. Photoshop is like, oh, you still want me to rotate the duck? I can only do one thing at a time, man. So when I hit Enter, that commits the change, and now allows me access to other things like my layers panel, blend styles, all different types of stuff here and there. So got a couple more things to show you before I let you guys attempt this once again. If I click on my mask layer or my mask thumbnail right here, this is the black one with the white window. Hold on, guys. I'm allowed to change how much is see-through and how much is transparent. So if I take my paintbrush tool, the default Photoshop colors are solid black and solid white. If I paint on this duck's eyeball, let's make my brush a little bit bigger. What do you think is going to happen? What'd you say? Okay, that's okay. What do you guys think is going to happen when I paint with black in this targeted crosshair right here? Anything? Do you think it's going to be black ink, or do you think it's going to be see-through? It is going to be see-through. When you paint on a mask with black, you are adding more background data. You're telling Photoshop to make this part of the background, make this invisible. So alternatively, if I were to paint with white, nothing's going to happen. Oh, that's black still. I'm going to hit X to switch my colors. I'm painting with white, nothing's happening. But if I paint with white down here, we get some duck emergence because we're making more things visible on our mask here. So the last thing I'm going to show you, because there's a little bit of duck overlap happening right here, I'm going to take my brush tool, going general to specific, something that I say all the time in this class. We're going to take some of this data away, okay? I want it to line up with the horse's spine a little bit more. Just painting with a black brush, or a brush set to solid black. Just painting literally as if you would be painting on a canvas, so we can get it a little bit closer to the horse's spine, make it a more gradual transition here. The last tool I'm going to show you, if you click and hold, oh my God, I got the hiccups. If you click and hold on this little drop icon, this is the blur tool. You'll find the smudge tool. And what the smudge tool does on a mask is nothing, okay? You can see it just kind of blurs the edge of the mask a little bit. If I switch back into the pixel layer dimension, remember back to the grain unit, if I switch back to the pixel dimension, I should be able to blend, smudge some of these colors so that it makes a more natural and realistic looking transition. I'm clicking a lot so that I have lots to work with. A more realistic looking transition from duck to horse, okay? There'll be a zoom room. Yeah, you're good to go. All right, so there's my example. Took me a little bit longer because I was talking, but to export this, I'm gonna go File, Export. I typically quick export as PNG, but you can also export as, which pops up this, once it loads, this dialog box. Format PNG, we want to keep the transparency, blah, blah, blah. When I click the blue export button right here, it's going to ask me where I want to save it, okay? I'm going to put it into the same folder that I've been putting stuff into, which is assignment 8.1. And we're going to call this the Canvas naming scheme of first initial, last name, P6. You can just do 8.1 and then do a VF for final version when you're ready to go. Click save. You're done. That is how you complete this challenge, which I will give you 10 minutes to do once again with your new knowledge. If you've already done a lot of these steps, or yours is pretty close, then you won't have much to do. Maybe refine your mask a little bit, or maybe change some of the opacities of situations. I'm not exactly sure. You'll find something to do for the next 10 minutes, applying what I've just shown you in the Zoom room here. Okay? Make sense? Cool. I'm gonna end the Zoom room. We'll have one last one where I go into more information about Photoshop, and then we'll get more into detail on Thursday and Friday with some actual like projects of sorts. Sweet. Thank you guys. That was a long live. Good job bearing with it. This time, this 10 minutes is yours to recreate the duck, use your second attempt with the new knowledge that you have. Okay. It's 5 seconds remaining. I'm going to talk about what Photoshop is used for. All right, so go ahead and resubmit your new attempt with your new knowledge, new cursed knowledge. Hello. Now we're going to talk about what does Photoshop accomplish, kind of give you an intro into what it's used for, why it's important, all types of reasons that you guys are in school to learn about Photoshop. So if we go into the modules, I need to attach your thread for the day. But we have a new week, May 6th to May 10th. We're going to look right here at this Unit 8 page, the introduction of Photoshop. So this is broken down because we're getting towards the end of the year. We've covered a lot, Mr. Hendricks and I have covered a lot of the elements of design that we're hoping to impart with you. Next, we're going to move into Photoshop, which has a very similar, but also in a lot of ways very different sort of line of thinking between Illustrator and Photoshop. So the biggest difference, I know I say that a lot, I'm trying to say less, But Photoshop is what's known as a bitmap software, otherwise known as a raster-based software, whereas Illustrator uses those vectors, okay? This is what I mentioned earlier in the day, where the vectors are easy to edit later because they're coordinates on a graph. You can easily change the coordinates. You can change the function, which eschews the results, which becomes visual. Photoshop is a bitmap. So if we break that word down, like we broke down compositing, bits are what make up data, okay? 8 bits to a byte, 8 bytes to I think it's like a nanobyte, kilobyte, gigabyte, megabyte, terabyte, you know all the bytes, right? 8 of those to 8 bits to 1 byte. You think about video games too, 8-bit video games, 16 bits. This is all the amount of data that they could store and communicate with the abilities at the time. So since Photoshop, I think came out in like 1989 or something, it uses bitmaps because we didn't have quite the understanding of, or the technology that we have today. It's a map of the bits. You got bits all over your screens. Bits are also called pixels. And when you map out a certain set of instructions, you map out very specific directions about what those bits are supposed to be. Sorry, we're live. When you change that data, you're changing the raw representation of what should be on the screen as compared to a mathematical expression like Illustrator, or as compared to something like a filter in Lightroom, or as compared to a lot of other visually creative sort of programs like Autodesk CAD or Blender or DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro for editing, all types of different varieties, okay? Why this is important is because it has something to do with scaling and quality. Since a raster is a bitmap type of image, it's going to have a set amount of data that it can work with, okay? A finite number of pixels on the screen. Pixels on the screen. That means it's like when you zoom in on a screenshot or you screenshot something a bunch, you're blurring those pixels because it's raster, making a bunch of new bitmaps, losing quality. Vectors, the relationship is coordinate here, curved coordinates here, coordinate here, connect those two, same thing here. 4 coordinates in the circle, you can scale that up and down infinitely large or small with no loss of quality. Raster images, the bits are mapped individually. This bit is blue. This bit is ice blue. Ice, blight. Okay. This bit is sky blue. Sky. Yellow, right? It's a actual 1-for-1 map of where all the data goes, okay? And Photoshop uses those rasters, which is what makes it a destructive photo editor, because we are changing this raster data unless we're using masks to cover up certain parts and adjust the parts that we see fit and or necessary. So there's a couple different types of file formats. These are things you see pretty frequently. Basically, any photograph or screenshot is going to be a raster image. And anything that comes out of Illustrator, excuse me, is going to be some flavor of vector image like this. PDFs are vectors, but only if they come out of a vector program like Illustrator. So anyway, let's go back up to the top about what we're going to be focusing on with Photoshop and why it's important. What we did today was a little bit of masking and a little bit of blending. These are skills that you can apply to basically any visual art type creative program, okay? You use masking in After Effects. You use masking in Blender. You use masking in, what's DaVinci's called? Resolve, or I can't remember the name. It'll come back to me, okay? You mask in Premiere Pro. You mask in Lightroom. You mask, there's so much masking that happens and it behaves the same way that we do it here, that knowing at least the process will help you apply it to other creative programs that you learn in the future. Blending is also important, making something look believable, okay? These 2 skills are majorly important if you want to be something like a concept designer or an concept artist, environmental designer for video games, web design, it's also important. Just basically anything that's visually expressive, the jobs that are typically pretty fun, are going to have some amount of masking or blending. And that's going to be what we're primarily focused on this week. These are more of the general skills that you can apply to a lot of things, including Adobe Illustrator. But we're going to be focusing on that Thursday and Friday. The week after that, we're going to get into some more intermediate compositing skills, some more intermediate Photoshop sort of stuff with shadows and detail. You got layer styles, and then some blend modes to make our compositions all the more believable, all the more interesting. Okay, and these are skills that you can apply to any graphic design program. They're all going to behave. It's not going to be exactly one for one like Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop are, but it will be pretty similar, and you'll be able to bridge the gap between the two of them. We're talking about Photoshop and Illustrator because they are still industry standards. There are competitors on the market. I've seen them. They're really solid competitors. I use a few myself, but everyone is still a lot of we're still in the Adobe world, so knowing how to use Photoshop and Illustrator give you an edge over a graphic designer or a visual artist or a concept artist, environment designer who does not have that experience. There's strengths and weaknesses to each Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator. It's part of your toolbox of skills needed to complete these designs. And then it's important to know the difference of when to use Photoshop, which is typically for print media, which we'll get into here in a second, things that are going to be physical or photography, versus Illustrator, which is more digital, more online, more needing to be scaled up and down to a variety of products, right? You'll understand the key differences between when to use what. And the last thing I'll share, this is a design that Mr. Hendricks put together. I believe it was for a private client. This is one from his freelance time. Photoshop and Illustrator work very, very well together because they create something called assets, right? If we look at this sort of layout in general, some of these shapes that you see familiar of Illustrator or kind of similar to Illustrator are really hard to do in Photoshop without it being a huge pain in the butt. So what Mr. Hendricks did was create some of these pieces, these assets, these components in Illustrator, like some of these cutouts, some of these graphs, maybe some of these transparent circles, maybe some of these image traces. Built a bunch of little pieces that he combined with Photoshop. Different skills that we use in Photoshop, like masking, like layout, some negative space. We got some typography, use of color, all the stuff that we've talked about this semester. Using those two together to create a poster such as this that is a lot easier to print from Photoshop and deliver into the physical world as compared to a poster on a screen. So you're going to use the two of them together in your graphic design career to create pieces of one for another. Like I'll give an example. I did some sticker designs for a client one time. I cut an image out in Photoshop, rasterized it, and brought it into Illustrator to trace it so I could have it scalable, and then sent that to the client and they printed it and it went great. So you'll use both of these programs in your graphic design sort of world. And that's all that I have to show you for today. We're going to talk more about masking and blending. You can read some more detail on this if you're curious, but these are the big ones that I want you to keep in mind. Especially this Photoshop versus Illustrator. We'll come back to this. But you guys did really, really good today. You should be proud. This is a new program you've never tried before, and you created a composition already, put it on the resume, an advanced skill that not every employee has. So you should be proud of yourself, and I am proud of you as well for hanging in the process. So good job today. This is all I need from y'all. I'll process this Zoom room. It'll be up shortly. You have a regular flex day, so make sure you know where you're going. We have 6 minutes left in this class, and I appreciate you guys very much. Yeah, me out.